I've professionally photographed everything from weddings to portraits, from concerts to corporate, and in every one of these situations, I use 3 advanced techniques that help me get the job done. Taking photos in church is no exception, and in this video, you'll learn 3 advanced church photography tips from a professional that will surely help take your photo game to a whole nother level.
Well, hey there, and welcome to Pro Church Tools, the show where in 10 minutes or less, you're going to get a dose of tips and tactics to help your church share the message of Jesus while we navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm Brady Shearer, joined as always to my right, your left, it is Sandy Skills.
Well, here I am, Sandy Skills. And Brady, today we're going to talk a little bit about some advanced photography tips. We've talked photography tips here and there a few times. And for those of us listening and watching today, maybe you're a volunteer photographer in your church, maybe you're a semi-amateur photographer on the side doing portraits and weddings. Today, we want to dive into some advanced photography tips. We don't want to talk the basics today. Today, we're talking advanced photography tips that I use in every situation, whether I'm shooting a wedding or a portrait setting or shooting stuff at church or here in the office. I'm using these tips and techniques all the time. And so I wanted to share them with the people of Pro Church Nation today. And so if you're listening to this episode right now, I would suggest that you watch this episode because there's going to be examples of all of these tips and techniques on the screen that you can see, photos that I've taken here on paid jobs, all different kinds of photos. And so you're going to see those on the screen today. Let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
So the first tip that I have is using foreground elements. I find when I'm taking photos at church or of people or in just about every situation, whether it be people or product or settings, I'm looking for a foreground element to kind of add some depth and drama to the image, just so it's not like one flat layer, but using a shallow depth of field and throwing some things in the foreground that are maybe out of focus to do a couple things. One, to add depth to the photo, and then 2, to draw attention to the subject of the photo. And so I do that in a few ways. One of those ways is in camera, and then the other 2 ways are using kind of some tools and tricks that I have up my sleeve. And so this first image that you're seeing is from a portrait session, an engagement session that I did this spring. We were in a cherry blossom orchard. And what I did here, and I do this whenever I'm shooting all the time, is I will grab a piece of foliage, often a leaf, something that matches the color palette of the environment I'm shooting in. So in this case, it was a green leaf from that cherry blossom tree. And I just hold it right in front of my lens here. So it's out of focus, but it just adds that pop of like green color and out of focus foreground element that really helps me focus on my subject. And also with the color, it just kind of brings the palette all together.
It's like an analog overlay.
Yes, exactly. So this is a fake leaf that I grabbed off a plant here in the office.
Grabbed from a church.
Sorry about
in the
that.
90s.
But yeah, if I'm outside, I'll grab a leaf off the ground. I'll gently grab one off a tree. I don't want to hurt too much nature. But I'll use anything outside that looks like the scene that I'm shooting in to add that drama to that image. But there's another tool that I picked up off of Amazon. You can't find this on the ground. You can find this on Amazon. You can see if you're watching that mine is broken, but that's okay because it adds even another element of weirdness to this tool. This is just a glass prism, and I'll put the link to this in the show notes below. You can buy it off Amazon for like $20. You can buy a cheaper one that's a little bit smaller. But similarly to how I use the leaf, I'll put this right in front of my lens, and you'll see this photo here. This braid is actually a photo of you. You're sitting at your desk, and I've put the prism in front of your computer screen because I didn't want your computer screen to draw any attention. I wanted the attention to be on you, which was the subject. So you can see in this photo that the prism has just kind of blurred out whatever's on the screen and added kind of like this rainbow prism effect to a little part of the image. Now, this prism is fun because you never really know what kind of light refractions you're going to get out of this. And so the end result is always different, and that's just a fun thing to do. But this third example that you're seeing now is using an element that's already in the photo and putting it in the foreground to kind of create a leading line. This is a term we use in photography, using something that's already in the scene to lead your attention to the subject. Oh. And so this is a thumbnail from a couple weeks ago when we were talking about Church Home Global, the new app from Church Home. I put my phone with the Church Home app on the windowsill and used one of these big blue beams that we have in the office to kind of lead the attention towards the phone, but also add that foreground element. And this is a tip, a trick that you can not only use in still photography, but we use this in our video work all the time.
Yeah, obviously when you're taking a photo, it's a single frame, so it's a still image, but using a foreground element in video is tremendously helpful when it comes to accentuating and exaggerating movement. So you might have, let's say, a slider on, maybe it's a 3-foot slider that you put your camera on. And that 3 feet is really, really short when you're looking at the entire frame.
Yeah.
But if you put that slider on the ground, so your camera is really close to the actual pavement or the floor, or if you put it near, let's say, a piece of foliage, and you then slide your camera, maybe the background is hundreds of feet away, but because that foreground element is just maybe 6 inches away, that movement now becomes actually accentuated.
Exactly.
We did this, we were in Yosemite, and we had our little Ronin S, and obviously the El Capitans and Half Domes of the world are nowhere near my camera frame. So what I would do is I'd go like near a tree or near some grass, so you could see the grass in the foreground, and then I make a subtle movement. Maybe I'm only moving the camera a foot.
Yeah.
But even though I have this gargantuan subject of the actual video, El Capitan, the movement still looks like really exaggerated and nice and pleasant.
Right.
And if that foreground element wasn't there, it would look like my camera was not moving at all.
Exactly. So using foreground elements to kind of manufacture depth and drama in your images. And the second tip is a camera tip that kind of piggybacks on using foreground elements. Now, I use autofocus almost exclusively. Autofocus systems in these cameras nowadays are so good that there's no real point in a daily situation to use manual focus, because you're just not going to be as precise as your camera's
Camera's better than you are.
So I'm using autofocus all the time, but if you're using a foreground element and you're using autofocus, how do you determine what your camera focuses on? And so this is an advanced camera technique that you can find in the advanced settings of your camera. I'm not going to explain how to do it on your camera. I'm going to put the links for major brands in the show notes below. So whatever brand you're shooting with, you can find it there. But this is how it works, and it's called back button focus. Now, this is my Canon 5D Mark IV. And on the back here, I have this little button called AF on. I actually have 2 of them because I have a battery grip as well. And I've assigned these buttons to be my autofocus buttons. So instead of having autofocus on the shutter, it's autofocus on this back button now. So when I'm taking a photo of that church home app, for example, one of the last examples we just looked at, I point my camera towards that phone. I press this back button, autofocus button, and now my focus is locked. Now I can reframe. And when I press the shutter is no longer assigned to autofocus,
right.
So it's not going to be searching again when I go to take that photo. The focus is locked where I locked with back button focus. And this is great for so many situations. You know, when I'm shooting weddings and I don't want to miss that first kiss, or when the couple's walking down the aisle and celebrating, I don't want to be holding down my shutter and having, 10 photos a second go off and have my camera searching for focus. I use that back button focus so that I can lock it. And then when I press that shutter, I know my focus is locked and it's not going to be searching. Now, this is applicable to church as well. If you're doing photos of your worship experience and your bass guitarist is doing, a 360 spin, throwing his guitar, he's playing his guitar on his back, whatever you want to catch that moment, you don't want your camera to be searching to focus. And so lock it in with that back button. And when you go to press that shutter, you know that your shot's going to be in focus.
Nice.
Now, this third tip is a little bit counterintuitive for me because I'm a sucker for using natural light in photography, especially in this office outside. We just have so much natural light, and so use it whenever you can. But this third tip is making use of artificial light. Now, I have 3 examples of this. The first example that you're seeing right now is making use of an on-camera flash using the bulb setting. And so what's a bulb setting, you ask? Well, it's on my camera, it just has a B. And so what it means is the shutter will stay open as long as you're holding the shutter for. And so when you're using an on-camera flash, the flash will trigger when you open that shutter. So it will freeze whatever is going on in that moment. But then if you keep holding that shutter button open, whatever happens after that moment is kind of going to get manipulated. And especially this photo is from a wedding that I shot recently during the dancing part of the evening. So there's this little girl dancing. She was having a blast. It was like disco kind of. So I wanted to communicate that in my photo. And so I froze the moment with the on-camera flash. But then if you can see this, if you're watching, all of the disco lights are kind of all trailed around. They look like snakes. And that's how I achieve that effect, is with on-camera flash and the bulb setting. This next photo is a self-portrait that I accomplished using off-camera flash. So I had 2 flashes set up that triggered when I took the photo to create this kind of illusion of motion. It froze my face. This is a self-portrait I did here in the studio. It froze my face facing forward, but then you also see kind of these ghosts of my face looking left and right. So this would be a really cool technique to use in a studio if you're creating maybe a sermon slide, a sermon graphic.
Staff photos.
Yes, do this for your staff photos. It kind of looks like there's some ghostly images there, and that's just using off-camera flash. And my third tip for artificial light is using the stage lighting that you have already installed at your church. This photo you're seeing now is not from a church service, it's from a concert that I recently shot. You can see that there's haze going on, and I waited for that perfect moment when the haze had kind of risen up out of the ground, and the golden light is just hitting this haze and creating this drama in this image that I could have never created with on-camera flash, off-camera flash. I just made use of the stage lighting that was already set up. The haze kind of helped me a little bit, and kind of embracing that. Stage lighting can sometimes be tough to handle, especially if you're used to shooting in natural light. But if you embrace it and look for ways to use that artificial light that is probably already there on your stage, you might get some really incredible results.
Great tips from Alexander Buffalo Bills, and that'll do it for this episode of Pro Church Tools. We'll see you next time. Hey, you made it the whole length of the video. What's next? Subscribe.
I like that. Do you like this? Tell us. Hit the like button.
Subscribe.